Hello, my name is Liliane Silva. I'm the Forage specialist for Clemson Universe, and today I'll be talking about the 300-day grazing program and how we can be thinking about how we could extend the time that we would be able to be grazing our forage systems and relying on that instead of feeding hay for such long periods of time per year. So before we start talking about some considerations or planning on how you can implement a longer grazing periods on your operation, we need to have an understanding how most of the systems are usually based on perennial grasses in our region, and that's going to that means that we are going to need to have a some plans to supplement forages through some months of the year. So in our case, because we're talking about Bermuda grass here, we would be needing to have a plan to supplement forages through fall and winter months, just because Bermuda grass will be dormant during those periods of the year. And when we are able to rely on some strategies to be feeding the animals during those times, we can be working towards reducing costs and improving the quality of the forage that we're going to be offering the animals with. And that's going to reflect on the animal performance as well that we could obtain during that period of the year. So this is just a visual distribution of an estimation, actually, when we would have the Bermuda grass and the Bahia grass plants growing throughout the year. And these other estimates, these other visual aids show us other times where we would have some groups of forages growing. And we have to deal with the seasonality of production for Bermuda grass, which means that this plant will go dormant in early to mid-fall, and then we will need to rely on other alternatives to be feeding the animals during those periods of the year. So some of the alternatives are to feed hay or baleage that we would have either bought or produced in the forage system, the operation for that period of the year. Or we could also use stockpiled forages or plant some annual cool-season forages to be able to use during that time. When we are thinking about trying to increase the number of days that we would be grazing pastures, we are going to try to work on lowering the costs that are associated with having to buy feed, having to buy hay, and really be feeding the animals for a large portion of the year. But also we would be able to work on lowering the costs if we were cutting the forest ourselves. We would also be able to lower those costs associated with cutting and storing the forage. And also we could be working towards improving the quality of the material that we're going to be offering the animals. Because in some cases, the way that the hay is stored might not be the best way, so there will be some losses associated with having that hay under areas that we might have waterlogging or rainfall directly falling over the bales for prolonged periods of time. So you might run into cases that you're going to have losses of feed and also quality of the material. We would also be able to work then on proper quality to try to meet the nutrient requirements as much as we can based on forages, and also be able to have that manure and the urine being put back in the forage fields. And this would be helping us to improve the nutrient cycling and really allowing that nutrient to be input back in the system and available for the plants to use. So as you can see, when we are thinking about grazing systems, we need to be thinking about the relationships between plant, animal, environment, soil, and those are all interconnected. So that's why we need to be thinking about the management that can optimize all those relationships that we are going to see, but also we do need to consider what are the goals and the budget for that operation, because those are going to be important, and also the level of skills, the management skills that the people working on those systems have and are able to really apply. This is a concept that Dr. Sullenberger from University of Florida, he defined it this way a few years ago, and I really like to have this holistic approach when we are dealing with forage systems, because we are also looking at the other points, and our products at the end of the day will be the animal products, just because they are the ones consuming that forage that we're producing. So some considerations that we need to do when we're thinking about having a longer grazing periods, a longer grazing season in the forage system. So first and foremost, we need to determine our forage base. And when I say this, it's not just if we're going to plant this or that perennial forage, but also what else you need to consider if you need to plant. For example, if you're managing a more intensive system, you might need to supplement your animals with some annual cool season or warm season annuals for some periods of the time, for either being able to meet the production, the quantity of forage that you have, or the quality of forage. So it's important to think about what are your needs and what you're going to be able to rely on to meet those needs. Then it's important to really improve the management practices, so we can be working towards improving that forage production quality. And it's always essential to have a plan B for extreme situations. And when I say extreme situations, I'm talking about prolonged dry periods or excessive rainfall, for example. So, for example, this year we did have a prolonged rainfall for most of our state, and this is an example that we need to either be start feeding hay, for example, or we would need to consider if we should sell animals. Something that's important to think about during those periods when extreme events happen is to not overgraze in your pastures when you have a situation that you have shortage of forage. The reason for that is because if we do overgraze the pastures during that time, we are going to be compromising the regrowth, and also we might be compromising the persistence of those fields, just because we're going to be the plants will be relying a lot on the energy reserves they have, and they are just going to be running into a situation that they deplenish that, and then they will be compromised to regrow back when the conditions are more favorable. Then it's also important to really be planning to have a proper weed control plan management. Weeds are going to be competing for water, for nutrients and sunlight with the forages. So when you have a high weed pressure, you are not going to have as much forage and production or quality on the field. And this is going to be impacting your ability to keep the animals there grazing and using those pastures and rely on the grazing more than having to feed something else. And also, we do need to think about how we are going to do the animal management aspects as well. If we can have a well-defined weaning season, which is going to be hand on hand with the calving season as well, we are going to be improving our ability to plan for times of the year that we would need to have higher forage quality available, or even when we would be able to just have a low quality material that dry cows would be consuming. So those types of management decisions, we are going to be able to do better if we have a good plan that will be taking consideration both animals and forage requirements. And that goes into this next point, which is we do need to work on a record keeping type of management for the operation. This is going to help us out on monitoring the responses, both plants and animals, and also to conduct some adjustments as needed, because then we are going to be relying on those numbers to see what is happening on the system. This was one of the points, and I'll just expand on this, which is improved management, grazing management. So when we're talking about improved grazing management, we do need to remind ourselves what are the objectives that we have when we are using a grazing management strategy. Usually it's to improve forage yield, improve the efficiency, the utilization of that forage in the system, and allow them forage to support the animal production, animal performance, while still working on the persistence that we would like that system to have. And through this management that we're going to be implementing, we should be working towards improving the distribution of the nutrients back into the pasture by the way that we're managing the resting time for what area the animals will have access to in a pasture, so they can really be working towards distributing more uniformly the manure and the urine back into the system. All of this should be linked to the needs of the enterprise in terms of the available budget, the return margin that you expect to have, and also both the management intensity and the skills are required to conduct a proper management so you can be successful with what you'd like to do. And like I said before, we do need to consider the plant and the animal requirements. So when we're thinking about plant requirements, mostly we're going to be thinking about how to maintain the energy reserves, how to make sure that you're leaving proper residual leaf area behind so the plants can really grow back in the expected period of time, and how to avoid damaging the growing points as well. Then in terms of animal requirements, we are going to be trying to balance the quality and the quantity of forage that's going to be available to meet those requirements for the animal performance expected for that animal. And on the quality side, we do need to try to meet the nutritional requirements that those animals have. So it's important that we're taking that in consideration as well. And I do like to think about this when we're talking about grazing. So Dr. Valal from University of Florida, he used this approach, and I incorporated this into my talks and about grazing as well. So we do need to reflect what is grazing. The simple definition is going to be the removal of the forage mass by whatever animal is grazing there, right? So this is grazing. So it is this. What is the difference here? So on the picture to your right, the animals are struggling to get that bite, that full mouth of bite, that full mouth of grass, and they are going to take more time to be able to even consume more forage. And they most likely are not getting enough forage. They are not getting enough nutrients as they should be daily. And we are going to be having some impacts on animal health and animal performance when we have an overgrazing situation like this. Animals have a certain number of movements that they can do with their mouth per day. So if they're spending most of those movements to try to capture forage to be able to consume, they're not going to spend as much time ruminating or just resting. So all just together will be impacting their performance at the end of the day. And then when we're talking about how to balance quality and quantity, we are going to be looking not only from the animal perspective, but also what's happening on the forages, what's happening on the forage stands per se. So when we're doing a intensive management and even overgrazing some areas, we will start seeing some portions of the field where the plants will start to die, and those will start to thin out. And also there's a huge impact on the root system. And when you dig plants out, like on this picture on the right, you can see the differences on forage, on the growth, on the root growth, and the depth as well, and just how those roots are distributed in the soil. This is going to impact how the ability of the plants to get water, to get nutrients, and to really persist over time, because the root systems are the major source of energy that's reserved for the plants to rely on their regrowth after their grades are cut. So this is going to be important for us, how we manage the forest systems to be able to have them persist over time and being healthy as well. One point to balance out that frequency and actually to be able to balance the intensity of the forage being removed is to adjust the stocking rate. So this should be done fairly often. And I'll be talking in a little bit about using rotational management, but rotational management is also something that we can be working, and then we'll be working on the frequency that the animals will have access to a given area. There are some other concepts here on this slide. I'll let you read them, and if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Stocking density and carrying capacity are not as talked about as stocking rate, but we should know what each one of them mean and how we can be working towards adjusting stocking rate and carrying capacity properly in our forage systems. And when we're talking about how we are going to be adjusting those aspects, especially stocking rates, we are going to be thinking about something like this. So if you look on your y-axis to your left, we have gain per animal, and to your right, you have gain per acre. So what we're talking here is the impacts that the stocking rate will have. And we generally would like to be sort of like in the middle, where we are marked here as optimal area, just because we're going to be able to balance how much gain our individual animals are having, but also what the gain will be for per acre as well. We are kind of on a good spot for both responses. And to be able to adjust the stocking weight, we do need to understand how much forage we have available, actually. So this is also from Dr. Valal from UF. We need to think about the amount of forage that we need to produce, and also how much we can produce, and try to balance, try to really equilibrate those. And the way that we are going to be working on this is to think about a forage budget. This is literally what we have to do in our households. We know how much expense we're going to have on a given month, and you know what your salary, your income will be on that period. So you need to really be balanced those to be able to pay for your expense, right? This is the same idea. So we will be adjusting our forage supply to what our animal demand is. Really balance those to be able to meet the quantity and the quality that the animals require. And to be able to determine the forage mass that we have available, we have several options, several methods that you can use. Most common is the pasture stick, the grazing stick, which is here on your right. This is literally a ruler that you are going to have a table on the side of this stick that shows how much grazable forage you should have per inch. However, this does not take in consideration the density of your forage stand. So we do need to be aware of this piece of information when we're using this method to determine how much forage we have. And then there are other methods. I'm not going to prolong discussing or explaining each one of these methods. I have a publication coming out soon on this. I have other resources that I can share with you if you'd like to understand how to measure and what other methods you might be able to use as well to determine forage mass on your pastures. Then, like I said, I was going to talk a little bit about rotational management. So rotational management is the best way to work on that frequency and intensity of forage that we're going to be trying to balance. So we are going to be subdividing a whole field into smaller paddocks, or really using allowing the animals to have access to that area for a certain period of time, then moving them to another pasture and allowing that area, that previous area, to rest for a certain period of time. Generally, most forage systems, we would like to have a period, around 4 to 7 days that the animals will be on a pasture, then move them to the next, just because this requires a lot of management, a lot of time to manage those, and not everybody can be on the field every day or every couple of days. So allowing, when you're planning the size of your pasture, the stock rate that you're going to be using on those areas at a given time, we could be trying to work towards allowing the animals to be there for 3 to 7 days, and before we have to move them to the next area. For some forages, especially for cool season forage, we can be working towards using strip grazing, which is a little more intensive management. So we're going to be relying on using temporary fence to define smaller areas, strips of the pasture that the animals will have access for shorter period of time. And then they would move forward progressively. This is fairly common to use on stockpiled forages like Bermuda grass stockpiled, and also on cool season species, and can be a good method to use and to be able to optimize the grazing efficiency and the quality of the forage that the animals are consuming. And I just mentioned temporary fencing. So electric fencing, it's something that we can have a good use on your forage system, because allow us to move them. We do have the option of having temporary electric fencing in some places and move them, and use that as a tool to really work towards improving the management that you're doing for both the plants and the animals as well. Then the next step to consider is to incorporate some legumes into your forage systems. They help with decreasing the need for inorganic nitrogen fertilizer, and they are going to work towards improving the forage quality and the forage production, and support the animal performance as well. So when you have legumes in the system, we are going to be working towards having that plant inputting nitrogen into the system. And if the plants, the legumes are in a mixture of grasses, they are going to supply the nitrogen to the grass, or even just allow the nitrogen to accumulate there in the soil for the next crop. And because they are in the forage system, they're also going to be available for the animals to consume, and those animals will be putting back the manure and the urine in the soil, so those nutrients can become available to them, to the soil, and then to the plants again in the same system. So like I said, when you have mixtures of legumes and grasses, this can be during the cool season, planting a grass with the clover, or during other periods of the year as well. And we are going to have the legumes inputting some of that nitrogen back in the soil, and recycling that nitrogen in the soil. We do need to think about the management that we're going to be using for mixtures when we have legumes in mixture with grasses. There are some adjustments that we need to make there. It starts really from the beginning, so from the seeding rate that you're going to use, then the stubble height recommended, and how often, and you're going to be able to graze those pastures, just to really optimize the time that you're going to have that legume persisting in the system for a given period. We do see some opportunity to extend the forage production, forage distribution, when you have mixtures of legumes and grasses, and we are going to have the benefit of improving that forage quality as well. Something that's really important to emphasize here is that we are going to have nitrogen fixation that's going to be directly proportional to the legume yield and the proportion of that legume in the pasture. So this is really important to think about. We cannot expect a really low portion of legume to be fixing a lot of nitrogen, or even if we're not managing those pastures in a proper way that will allow that legume to yield, to accumulate forage, and really to establish well, you're not going to get as much benefits of the nitrogen fixation as you would if you were managing that system properly. Then something that is an alternative for our region is to mix alfalfa into Bermuda grass systems. Bermuda grass and alfalfa have similar soil fertility and drainage requirements, so just makes alfalfa a good alternative to plant into Bermuda grass systems to rely on that nitrogen that the alfalfa will be inputting in the system, but also the quality and the production improvements that we see when we adopt alfalfa, incorporate alfalfa into Bermuda grass stands. So this is a general overview of how we would go about establishing, and then we can use these alfalfa Bermuda grass mixtures under grazing or to produce hay or baleage. The stubble high is the same for either management, 4 inches, and we should be giving at least 28 days of interval for regrowth. So it's between 28 and 35 days, the recommended resting interval that we will need to give to the mixture to before we turn the animals in again, or we cut next time. And if you'd like more information about alfalfa Bermuda grass mixtures, we do have a management guide and a calendar publications that were released earlier this year. You can reach out to me if you'd like those, and I'll be glad to share more information and help you out on guiding you on how to implement alfalfa into Bermuda grass systems as well. So when we are thinking about our options to provide forage for the animals during those forage gap periods, one of the ways is definitely stockpiling grasses, in this case Bermuda grass, which we can work on offering a good quality forage that's going to be standing there, and the animals can go there and harvest themselves. And generally, we use grazing on those conditions, just because we are going to be able to improve the harvest efficiency that we're going to have on those systems. And as I mentioned before, for thinking about how we can have a longer period of time, we're going to rely more on the grazing, but it's also good to have a plan B. So a plan B needs to be something that's readily available, and it can be some hay that you produce on your own farm over those periods of the year that you had extra forage growth. So you can be really working towards having a good quality hay just available when you need, but we do need to work on how we're going to store that hay. So there are several don'ts. Don't live on places where waterlogs, don't live in direct contact with soil, don't live where it's directly exposed to the weather and wildlife. Try to avoid mold contamination, other things as well. And this is going to be something that you should have as a plan B for additional times as you're thinking about feeding hay. You need to have for extra additional time as well as needed. Then when we think about supplementation of for either the quantity or the quality of forage that we need, we do need to consider annual species most of the time. So when we're thinking about the choice of forages that we could have, you should take in consideration where you're located, the level of management that you could approach, the nutrient management that you could do, and the animal requirements. And it's always a good option to think about forage mixtures when possible, just because then we can also work towards extending the forage distribution and the quality for different periods. There are several options of annual warm season and cool season forages. So I list them here. You can go through them in more details. I'll just sort of like pass through. So for the warm season species, you, for both actually, for annual species, you will need to plant them in a prepared seed beds. And for the warm season species, usually these are helpful in more intensive systems where you will need to rely on having additional forage available there, or additional quality as well. There are some issues with sorghum and sorghum seed and grass that we need to be aware of, especially if we run into times that we have either prolonged droughts or early frosts on those plants, and their ability to accumulate some compounds that are toxic to animals. So there is some information that if you would like to have, we can talk through that later about as well. Other options are millet, crabgrass. They are really good quality and accumulate a good amount of forage. Then we have some legumes. We have cowpea, we have sun hemp. In the bottom, sun hemp is just plant here, and there's cowpea here as well as cowpea in the lower portion of the stand on the picture on the top. And they are options that will be fixing some nitrogen into the system as well. Then when we go to the cool season forages, we have ryegrass, small grains, we have clovers, we have several species that we could be relying on. And they are species that we would be established in fall to graze a little towards mid-fall, late December, depending where in the region you are and how early you establish them in the season. We can also rely on using some brassicas. So here are some information on brassicas. I know not a lot of people are familiar with them. They are good options as well. Sometimes we can see some animals taking a little more time to adjust to the taste. So it can take around 1 week or so for the animals to get used to the taste. So it's a good approach to really mix the species with other cool season plants, cool season grasses, which will be growing around the same time as well. So just so you can dilute the taste and dilute the forage with other things. Then we have clovers. We have several several varieties that you can use. They do require a good fertility, good pH. So it's important to really be planning on how to manage those soils ahead of time, and same for alfalfa. Alfalfa is a high yield legume, but to achieve those the range of yield that we're seeing here, we do need to work on the pH. We do need to work on the macro and micronutrients that we're going to be offering the plants, and also how we are going to be managing those systems as well. And now, as I mentioned before, it's important to think about having a good record keeping management tool. It helps with determining how your current plan for foraging for animal management is going, and what will need adjustments later, and supports the decisions that you're going to be making for the next year, while also helps you to track budget expenses as well. I just wanted to put this here because this goes with the have a plan B point. This is one of the fields we have here at the station. It usually have water logging when we have consecutive rainfall events, and this year was no different. So during summer, this was probably late June, early July, I believe. We had several. Oh, was actually early July, early to mid July, because we were still dry in June. So we had these several rainfall events, and this area had waterlogging for a long period of time. So as you can see, a lot of yellowing around that whole area there. It's just the water that was logging there and the plants start to die. And we had millet planted there. So we need to be really working on the management that we're going to be doing for those areas to rely on recycling that nutrient back into the system, because that's going to be helping us to decrease the amount of fertilizer that we need to be putting back. So it's a reliable way to really recycle the nutrients in the system, within the system as well. So when I talk about this, is that we are going to be working on those imports. So the feeds, the manure that's coming in, the legumes, the fertilizer, are sources of nutrients that are coming in the system. And then when we are able to recycle those back, we're really working on making them available to the plants again. There are some exports that will be the animals that we're selling, the milk production, the hay, other losses, environmental losses. But there are ways that we're definitely going to lose some of those nutrients for other ways, but this is not necessarily a bad thing. And then when we're working on the quality of the forage and really working on the whole system and how we're recycling those nutrients back in the system, we're also going to be working on improving the soil organic matter in our soils. And this goes with the carbon sequestration as well. The forage systems can do really well. And it helps with water infiltration, soil fertility, increases compaction, and makes the nutrients available to the plants as well when we're improving the contents that we have, the concentration of soil organic matter in the soil. Well, this is what I had for this topic. I really appreciate you watching this presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out to me through this email here on the screen. I'll be glad to help you and answer any questions you have. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed.